So we are welcome back to the next session on this tutorial. So the gospel according to Mark. So I've been able to talk about the general introduction to the gospel itself. Now let's delve into the literary appreciation of the book, the gospel according to the book itself. So, and I told you what we are going to be examining, be talking about the authorship and all that, because those are the things literary appreciation actually, criticize. It's just like a criticism. So we are going to see the authorship, talk about the setting and all that. So we are starting with the authorship of the book, Gospel according to Mark. Who is the author? Who wrote the gospel? Who wrote the gospel? That's the question we are going to be answering now. Who wrote the gospel? So why do we have to ask this question? So the reason for this question is that there is no direct indication of the author of the book in the book itself. So no direct indication, that is, no name of the author. So no name is mentioned in the gospel as the author of the gospel of the book. So how do we now come to agree, or how do we now come to have the man called Mark as the author of this book? So this is what is going to lead us into a critical or a kind of careful investigation of the book to get to know if truly it was written by Mark or it was just something like that. So a kind of, so now analyzing this, so it leads us into studying, as in, let me use a simple language. So to get to know this actually, so we get to study or to analyze or to see two evidences called the external evidence and internal evidence. So external evidence and internal evidence. So these evidences are brought together to explain the authorship of the book. So in that statement, so in that view, we can say we can call them testimonies. So let's start with the external evidence. So when we say external evidence, so what does it mean? It means a kind of early testimony that is outside outside the book itself. That is early testimony outside the book itself, in order that is outside the book itself, which explain or which support Mark being the author of the gospel according to Mark. So these testimonies are not found in the book itself, but they are the early testimonies from the church fathers and all that, early church fathers. So, and these testimonies we are going to be talking about probably 5 or 6 testimonies there on that. So, and the first one is what is called annotation by Papias. Annotation by Papias. So this is a kind of earliest witness to the gospel of Mark and its origin. Kind of earliest witness to the gospel of Mark and its origin. And who was this Papias that we're talking about? So Papias was the bishop of Hierapolis in Egypt, the bishop of Hierapolis, and it was around 170 to 150 AD. 170 to 170. Sorry, that should be 170. I'm sorry. So that was around 70 AD to 150 AD. 70 AD to 150 AD. So now from these comments, there is a book he wrote. He wrote called The Interpretation of the Lord's Saying. So it's just like a 5-volume book. So from this book, it is asserted there that Mark, having become Peter's interpreter, wrote accurately as many things he remembered, not indeed in order of the things spoken and done by the Lord, but as before said, he followed Peter, who gave him such instructions as was necessary. So then, Mark made no mistake in thus recording some things it is some things as he remembered them. For he made it his own concern not to omit anything of the things he heard, nor to falsify anything he heard. So if you look at this annotation, look at this statement. This statement is telling us some things which I will bring out systematically. One thing is that Peter, that is Mark, was an interpreter of Peter. So he wrote accurately what he heard from Peter. So to summarize that, it's just like Mark has been the interpreter of Peter, actually reproduced the preaching of Mark. And Mark was not interested. He was not interested in unnecessary introduction or stories about probably like parables, preachings, teachings like that. So what was his concern was presenting Jesus Christ as a man of miracle, as an action man. So he wrote, like he stated there, that not indeed in order as he said. So he wrote what he heard, and he presented the works of Jesus Christ. That is why the gospel is regarded as the gospel itself is regarded as the gospel of action. So that is, he presented Jesus Christ as a man of action. So in this sense, I would like to bring out something there, that he made it his own concern not to falsify anything. He made it his own. It made it his own concern. He added no word to it. Neither did he remove from what he heard from Peter. So he wrote accurately what he heard from Peter. So that was his concern. That was his concern by the time he was writing this book. So we can say it was very brief. If you look at this, if you read his gospel is very vivid, as if he was there. So as if he was there. The answer to that, the solution is that Mark or Peter was behind his gospel. So definitely the major point there is that he was an interpreter of Peter, and as a result of being an interpreter of Peter, he recorded what he heard from Peter. It's just like reproducing Peter's preaching. So, and he made it his concern not to falsify anything, not to omit anything. So he wrote accurately according to what he heard. So that is from the annotation of Papias, as found in his 5-volume book called Interpretation of the Lord's Saying. Interpretation of the Lord's Saying. So let's go to the second testimony, external evidence. So these evidences are actually trying to support Mark being the writer of the gospel according to Mark. The second one is called the anti-Marcionite prologue. We all know the meaning of Marcion. We know the story behind Marcionite. So since we have done the early church history, so we got to see that in the heretical movement, the history of the early church and the history and doctrine of the early church. So under the heretical movement, there is this man called Marcion that is actually recorded, that was an heretical teacher with his own doctrine. So now there is this anti-Marcionite prologue. Anti-Marcionite, as its sound, means against Marcion. You can say against Marcion. There's a book, a prologue, or there's a book written from the prologue of this book. That is the opening statement of this book. So it is also stated there that he, that is Mark, was an interpreter of Peter. So after the death of Peter, he wrote down this same gospel in the region of Italy. So we are going to see that from this anti-Marcionite prologue too. So Mark is being referred to, and is being referred to as the interpreter of Peter. So one thing you have to note again is that he wrote the gospel after the death of Peter. So we get to know also where he wrote the gospel. So the setting, or where he was when he was writing the gospel, was in the region of Italy, which was Rome. So that is about the anti-Marcionite prologue. And see that one too is still supporting Mark as being the author of this gospel. Another one I'm going to add to it again is that the next one is the Irenaeus. So Irenaeus, there is this testimony from Irenaeus too. Irenaeus, who was Irenaeus? He was the bishop of Lyons. So, and he also states in his book, there is a book he wrote too, called Against Heresies, which was written around 185 AD. 185 AD. Now, this is what Irenaeus stated. So now, after the departure, so the question is, was it death? Or what kind of departure? So departure of who? So after the departure of Peter and Paul, is that talking about the separation, of Peter and Paul, or the death of Peter and Paul? So after the departure of Peter, after departure, that is, the question there in brackets is, was it the death of Peter and Paul? So Mark, the disciple of Peter, himself also transmitted to us in writing the things preached by Peter. We are still going to see. So we are still saying almost the same thing. That is, he wrote. Mark was the disciple of Peter. He also wrote after the departure. We don't know if it is death or just a departure between Peter and Luke. So he wrote himself what he heard Peter preached. So which means it's just like the memo or a kind of the reproduction of Peter's gospel. So I'm going to stop here now. But in the next video I will continue on the external evidence. Thank you for watching.